3 meals a day is not a biological fact about the human body. It is a historical accident with a specific origin date. The idea that humans should eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner at regular clock-driven intervals is roughly 200 years old. Before the Industrial Revolution and before factory shift schedules, humans did not eat this way at all in any culture. And your body, which was shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of a completely different eating pattern, does not expect it. Understanding what ancient humans actually did with food will change how you think about every meal you eat and every meal you skip. The story begins with fire, specifically with what cooking did to the human relationship with food and time and energy. Before cooking, the process of extracting sufficient calories from raw food required enormous amounts of time and digestive effort. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, spend roughly 6 hours per day chewing, which is the biological requirement for processing raw plant material. Cooking breaks down cellulose and denatures proteins before they enter the digestive system, effectively pre-digesting food outside the body. The nutritional difference between cooked and raw food is so significant that it fundamentally altered the evolutionary trajectory of our entire species. This means cooked food delivers dramatically more usable calories per gram than the same food in its raw state. Research by Richard Wrangham at Harvard has estimated that cooking increased the caloric yield of human food by somewhere between 30 and 40%. This single change had profound consequences for how often humans needed to eat and when food was even available to eat. Hunter-gatherer eating was fundamentally opportunistic rather than scheduled, tied to what could be found, caught, or gathered on any particular day. Some days produced abundant food and large meals. Other days produced very little, and this variability was the normal baseline condition of existence. The concept of 3 guaranteed meals arriving at predictable times each day would have been completely alien and frankly incomprehensible to any prehistoric human. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence from traditional societies consistently shows eating patterns organized around food availability rather than clock time. What we call hunger today is often a conditioned response to clock time rather than a genuine biological signal from the body itself. The Hadza of Tanzania, among the most extensively studied traditional foraging populations remaining, do not eat on a schedule at all. They eat when food is gathered or hunted successfully, which means meal timing and meal size vary enormously from day to day. Hunter-gatherer groups in the Amazon basin, the Kalahari, and across sub-Saharan Africa all show similar patterns of variable opportunistic eating. This is not poverty or food insecurity in the modern sense. It is the actual evolved relationship between human biology and food intake. Your digestive system, your metabolic hormones, and your hunger signaling pathways were all shaped by this pattern of variable intake over millions of years. The physiological machinery that manages your hunger and satiety was calibrated against an environment where meals were irregular, sometimes large, and sometimes absent entirely. Ghrelin, the hormone that drives hunger, and leptin, the hormone that signals satiety, operate in a system that expects variability, not rigid scheduling. When you force this system into a pattern of 3 equally spaced meals every single day, you are imposing a structure that is biologically novel. The human metabolic system did not evolve in an environment where food appeared reliably at fixed intervals 3 times every single day. This does not mean the 3-meal pattern is inherently harmful, But it does mean it requires understanding rather than assuming it represents biological default. Now let us get specific about where 3 meals per day actually came from as a cultural institution in the modern sense. The Roman Empire provides an instructive early example because Romans actually had a strong cultural belief that eating more than one substantial meal per day was unhealthy. The Romans typically ate one main meal in the late afternoon called the cena, and considered multiple daily meals to be a sign of excess. Medieval Europeans similarly organized their eating primarily around 2 meals, a midday dinner and an evening supper, with breakfast uncommon and sometimes actively discouraged. The idea that breakfast was the most important meal of the day was not ancient wisdom. It was a marketing slogan created in the early 20th century. The Kellogg brothers, who had significant financial interests in selling breakfast cereal, were among the primary architects of this cultural belief in America. The shift toward 3 standardized daily meals accelerated dramatically during industrialization as factory work imposed rigid time schedules on working-class populations. When workers must arrive at a factory at a specific hour and labor for a specific number of hours, break times become standardized institutional features. The breakfast cereal industry invested millions in research specifically designed to create cultural associations between morning eating and health and vitality. These institutionalized breaks, one in the morning and one at midday, created the structural conditions that normalized 3 eating periods across an entire population simultaneously. The meal pattern that billions of people now treat as natural human biology is in significant part a product of 19th century factory management decisions. This history matters because it reveals that the 3-meal pattern was adopted for logistical and economic reasons entirely unrelated to human physiology or nutritional science. It was efficient for organizing industrial labor. It was profitable for food manufacturers, who could sell more packaged products across more eating occasions. And it spread from there. The scientific evidence on meal frequency and human health is considerably more nuanced than the 3 meals default assumption would suggest. Research on traditional societies and on controlled eating studies has consistently shown that humans are metabolically well adapted to extended periods without food. Intermittent fasting, which has attracted enormous scientific and popular interest over the past 2 decades, essentially describes eating patterns that were ancestrally normal. The evidence that eating frequency affects long-term metabolic outcomes has become increasingly clear as nutritional science has matured over the past several decades. The metabolic shift that occurs after 12 to 16 hours without food, moving from glucose metabolism toward fat oxidation and ketone production, is not a stressed emergency state. It is a normal and evolutionarily ancient metabolic mode that human physiology is specifically designed to enter, sustain, and benefit from across extended periods. Autophagy, the cellular cleanup process that accelerates during fasting periods, represents one of the most important maintenance mechanisms in human biology. The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2016 was awarded to Yoshinori Ohsumi specifically for his work uncovering the mechanisms of autophagy. Research published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2019 by Mark Mattson comprehensively reviewed the evidence for metabolic switching and its health implications. The review found robust evidence that the shift between fed and fasted metabolic states improves glucose regulation, reduces inflammation, and supports cardiovascular function. This metabolic switching requires sufficient fasting periods to trigger effectively, which the 3 meals plus snacks pattern of modern eating consistently prevents from occurring. Many researchers studying metabolic health have proposed that the continuous eating pattern of modern industrialized societies is itself a significant driver of metabolic dysfunction. The connection between reduced eating frequency and improved longevity markers has been documented across multiple animal models and increasingly in human observational studies. When the body never fully enters a fasted state, the metabolic maintenance processes that evolved to operate during fasting periods never fully engage. The idea that humans must eat frequently to maintain stable blood sugar or to keep metabolism elevated is a persistent myth that contradicts the physiological evidence. Blood glucose is tightly regulated through multiple hormonal systems that function effectively across extended fasting periods without requiring continuous food input. The metabolic rate, contrary to widespread belief, does not meaningfully decrease during short to moderate fasting periods of 12 to 48 hours. Research has actually found a slight increase in metabolic rate during early fasting as norepinephrine rises to mobilize energy stores from fat tissue. The feeling that you must eat every few hours to feel normal or to perform cognitively is a real subjective experience, but it is also significantly a product of conditioning. Bodies habituated to continuous eating develop patterns of blood glucose fluctuation and hunger signaling that feel uncomfortable when that pattern is interrupted. The circadian biology of eating represents one of the most underappreciated dimensions of nutritional science, and one with direct practical implications for most people. But this discomfort is not evidence of biological need. It is evidence of adaptation to an artificial pattern, and it resolves with remarkable speed when the pattern changes. There is also the question of circadian biology and meal timing, which has become a rich area of research over the past decade. Specifically, human physiology is organized around a circadian clock that coordinates metabolic function across a roughly 24-hour cycle. Insulin sensitivity, digestive enzyme production, and gut motility all vary predictably across the day in ways that make some eating times more metabolically favorable than others. Research on what is called time-restricted eating, which aligns food intake with the more metabolically active daytime hours, has shown meaningful benefits in multiple human trials. Studies by Sachidananda Panda at the Salk Institute have demonstrated that restricting eating to an 8 to 10 hour window during the active phase of the day improves multiple metabolic markers. These benefits occur even without changing what is eaten or how many total calories are consumed, suggesting that timing itself carries significant metabolic information. Understanding meal timing as a biological variable rather than a social convention opens up meaningful opportunities for improving metabolic health without changing diet quality. The ancestral eating pattern, in which food was consumed during daylight hours when active hunting and gathering was occurring, naturally aligned with these circadian preferences. The modern pattern of eating across 14 to 16 hours per day, frequently including food close to bedtime, consistently misaligns with circadian metabolic function. There is also something worth examining in the cultural and psychological dimensions of how we have organized eating in modern industrialized societies. The three-meal framework creates a strong cultural expectation that not eating at meal times is abnormal, unhealthy, or socially deviant in various contexts. This expectation generates genuine anxiety in people who skip meals, creates social friction around food choices, and shapes medical advice in ways not always supported by evidence. The widespread medical advice to eat breakfast every morning, regardless of hunger, is a good example of cultural assumption being transmitted as health guidance. Several large-scale studies examining the correlation between breakfast eating and health outcomes have found that most of the apparent benefit disappears when confounding variables are controlled. The relationship between meal timing, circadian rhythms, and metabolic health represents one of the most active and consequential areas of current nutritional research. People who consistently eat breakfast differ from people who skip it in many lifestyle dimensions beyond just breakfast consumption itself. The controlled experimental evidence for mandatory breakfast as a health intervention is substantially weaker than its cultural status in nutritional advice would suggest. The practical implications of understanding ancestral eating patterns are genuinely significant for how you think about your own relationship with food. Hunger is a signal worth taking seriously, but it is not a crisis requiring immediate response, especially in a modern environment of constant food availability. The cultural transmission of 3 meals as biological necessity has been reinforced by food industry marketing, medical convention, and simple social inertia simultaneously. The discomfort of temporary hunger, which ancient humans experienced regularly as a normal feature of existence, is not physiologically dangerous in well-nourished individuals. Learning to distinguish genuine hunger from habituated appetite patterns, from boredom, from social cues, and from mild discomfort is itself a meaningful form of metabolic self-knowledge. The research strongly suggests that incorporating regular fasting periods, whether through time-restricted eating or occasional full-day fasts, supports metabolic health in ways the 3-meal pattern does not provide. This does not require extreme protocols or rigid rules. It requires understanding what your biology actually expects based on the conditions that shaped it. Recognizing the industrial origins of the 3-meal pattern does not mean abandoning structure entirely, but rather developing a more informed relationship with eating timing. Your digestive system evolved in an environment where food was sometimes abundant and sometimes scarce, where large meals were followed by substantial fasting periods. The machinery inside you is specifically designed to handle this variability, to extract maximum value from food when available, and to sustain function and health during periods without it. The 3 meals per day rule is not a biological prescription derived from human physiology. It is a recent cultural convention derived from industrial scheduling. The physiological evidence consistently shows that human bodies are extraordinarily adaptable to varying meal patterns without compromising function or well-being in healthy individuals. Your body does not know this convention exists and does not particularly care whether you follow it on any given day. What it knows is the ancient pattern of eat when food is available, fast when it is not, and the physiological wisdom encoded in that pattern across millions of years. Every major traditional culture that has been studied anthropologically shows eating patterns that differ substantially from the 3 standardized meals convention of industrialized societies. The next time you skip a meal, and feel the first stirring of hunger, remember that this feeling is ancient, and your ancestors would recognize it completely. They felt it regularly, they functioned within it, they hunted and gathered and thought and solved problems while experiencing it without crisis. The diversity of traditional eating patterns across cultures suggests there is no single correct frequency and that human biology accommodates a wide range successfully. That capacity for sustained function in the fasted state is not a special talent. It is your biological inheritance, and it is waiting for you to use it. Understanding the historical and biological context of meal frequency is itself a form of nutritional literacy that most educational systems have never provided.